For more on the fight against ISIL, Michael Shank joins us now from New York. He's the Associate Director of Legislative Affairs at the Friends Committee on National Legislation. It's an organization that advocates for peaceful solutions to world crises. ISIL raising the flag there in Kobani, Kurds in the town insisting the town has not fallen. I want to get your take on what's happening there.
Different accounts, some saying it's fallen. What Kobani shows, most importantly, is that this is a fight for strategic locations and strategic resources. ISIS taking strategic oil reserves in northern Iraq, strategic water reserves, certainly the fight over water reserves in Syria, which led up to the civil war, now taking strategic locations in the border regions, showing that ISIS is looking to leverage as much political power as possible, whether that be through resource wars or strategic locations to garner, more in terms of ISIS support, more strategic caliphate regions that might serve their ongoing political purposes.
If it falls, and that's a big if, we don't know if it's going to, but given its proximity to Turkey and what NATO is saying about spillover effect and all of that, how is this going to complicate matters further, would you say?
Well, Turkey's parliament last week voting to send in troops. They're the first country to send in ground troops. Obviously, Senator McCain and Senator Graham in the U.S. voting to send in ground troops. Most importantly, however, congressional authority has not yet been issued. The 2001 authorization for use of military force, 2002 authorization for use of military force don't cover ISIS. Senator McCain saying that they need a new AUMF. But Obama's been waging this war in the media, not taking it to Congress, not taking it to the American public for a debate. But we'll likely see NATO weigh in, as your reporter mentioned earlier, if ISIS goes further north into Turkey. So
do you see it as an illegal action then?
Well, there are a couple of illegal actions. One, the White House not getting congressional authority, so there's legal authority issues raised there, but also the White House saying that they're not going to execute stricter standards over civilian deaths, so they're undermining international humanitarian law. So on several fronts, there's some major issues of illegality, whether it be humanitarian law or congressional authority.
We saw this beheading video of Alan Heading, and at the time, another U.S. aid worker being threatened with beheading. His parents with an emotional appeal today. At the same time, the parents of James Foley appearing on another network saying that the United States government should have negotiated more with ISIL. Should the U.S. government be negotiating with the terrorist group?
Well, the RAND Corporation did a study several years ago looking at how terrorist groups end, and they studied almost 300 terrorist groups from 1968 to 2006. What they found is 83% of them were ended or dismantled by some combination of the following: policing, intelligence, political process, negotiations. Only 7% were ended by military means. And so the fact that the White House is overwhelmingly biasing military means in this case shows that they've got very poor strategy if they're not following their own Pentagon think tank's RAND Corporation study. So yeah, we absolutely should be engaged in political negotiations if we want to stop some kind of caliphate across Iraq and Syria. Negotiations over these strategic locations and strategic resources is key.
The Canadian Prime Minister talking to Parliament today, they're expected to vote again tomorrow and probably will join the coalition. The coalition seems to be growing. But what does it say about the coalition that we're talking about Kobani possibly falling to ISIL?
Right. Well, in terms of our coalition, the Western coalition, I've always claimed that it's weak because we've only had 5 of the Arab nations in the 22-nation Arab League, and only 5 of the Muslim nations in the 57 Organization for Islamic Cooperation. So we've got a small coalition on that front. Obviously, David Cameron also trying to rally his own parliament to send in troops. He's waiting for Labour to kind of give him the green light. But he and John Kerry and others are really raising this good versus evil narrative that's almost more vitriolic than George Bush, the previous president's good versus evil rhetoric. So we're going to see this narrative played out again in the media, not in Congress, not with the American public that's war weary at this point. But to your beheading point and also the letter that was released of the hostage, this is a war now being played out over the media.
Who's winning that war?
That's a great question. I think the Pentagon hopes that it's winning that war. John Kerry's performance in Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he would probably say that he won that war, but it remains to be seen. I think the beheadings are so visceral for the American public, despite the fact that, the U.S. has killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqis in our air campaigns, airstrike campaigns, and drone strike campaigns. So a death is a death here, but a beheading for the American public is very visceral.
Michael Shank joining us from New York. Thanks so much.